Jack Morrison had always believed the morning coffee on his ranch tasted better than anywhere else on earth, until a high-pitched shriek shattered his peaceful illusion. He nearly spilled the scalding brew all over his faded jeans, startled as the piercing noise resonated across his property. Rushing outside, half awake and still holding his beloved mug emblazoned with the words, "World's Okayest Rancher," Jack spotted the source of the commotion, a furious woman in leopard print pajamas screaming into her phone near his front gate. It was none other than Karen Baxter, his notoriously dramatic next-door neighbor and the self-appointed queen of their subdivision's homeowners association. Today, she appeared particularly incensed, her eyes wild, hair disheveled, ranting about barnyard tyranny and rampant animal chaos. "Oh, believe me," Karen shouted into her phone, oblivious to Jack's presence. "He's got at least 50,000 cows, goats, pigs, and God knows what else stomping all over this place. It's disgusting. Come immediately." Jack blinked in confusion, glancing over his modest herd grazing peacefully behind him. Far from the exaggerated claim, only a dozen sleepy cattle and a few lazy goats populated his pasture at the moment, chewing quietly on grass without the faintest interest in chaos. He wondered briefly if Karen had mistaken his small ranch for the state fairgrounds. "Ma'am, you're exaggerating a bit, aren't you?" Jack gently called out, hoping to defuse her rant with mild humor. Karen whipped around, her eyes narrowing dangerously as she spotted him, pointing accusingly. "There he is. The mastermind behind this animal infestation," Karen shouted dramatically into her phone. "Hurry! He might release more creatures at any moment." Jack took a long sip of his coffee, stifling a chuckle at her theatrics. In his years dealing with Karen's frequent tirades, he'd learned that logic and calm reasoning rarely prevailed. Today, though, he felt an odd curiosity about what she expected would happen next. Within minutes, 2 sheriff's cruisers, sirens wailing and lights flashing, raced down the dirt road toward the ranch. Deputies spilled from their vehicles, looking mildly confused as they approached the gate where Karen stood fuming, arms crossed defiantly. Sheriff Tom Allen stepped forward, scanning the area cautiously. "All right, Karen, what's this emergency you called about?" Karen thrust a finger dramatically toward Jack, her voice trembling with righteous fury. "Sheriff, arrest this man immediately. He's keeping an illegal amount of animals here. Our HOA rules explicitly forbid more than 5 animals per household, and he clearly has thousands." Sheriff Allen glanced toward the sparse herd munching lazily behind Jack, then at Karen's wild-eyed expression, skepticism clearly etched on his face. "Thousands?" he repeated slowly, raising an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that number?" "Absolutely," Karen insisted, crossing her arms tighter. "Look at them. Everywhere." The deputies exchanged amused glances. Jack stepped forward casually, mug still steaming in hand, and offered a friendly nod to Sheriff Allen. "Morning, Tom." "Jack," Sheriff Allen nodded back, clearly struggling not to smile. "Karen here seems convinced you've turned this ranch into a livestock metropolis overnight." "Well," Jack said with mock seriousness, glancing thoughtfully toward his herd, "I suppose 12 cows and 4 goats might look pretty intimidating if you've never been around a ranch before." The deputies chuckled softly. Karen's cheeks reddened in outrage. "Don't let him fool you. He must be hiding more somewhere. He's a menace." Sheriff Allen sighed, shaking his head gently. "Karen, Jack here is perfectly within his rights. Besides," he added, suppressing a grin, "you might want to reconsider escalating this. He's the Livestock Commissioner for the entire state." Karen froze mid-breath, the righteous anger on her face evaporating into pure disbelief. Her mouth opened and closed silently, words failing her completely for the first time since Jack had known her. The deputies barely contained their laughter as Jack quietly revealed his official state badge from his pocket, flashing it casually with a mild shrug. "Sorry, Karen. I guess that makes me the head animal wrangler around these parts." Karen's jaw hung comically low, her expression cycling through embarrassment, confusion, and dawning humiliation. You're the Livestock Commissioner?" she finally stammered, her voice shrinking rapidly. "Yep," Jack said lightly, sipping his coffee again with exaggerated calmness. "Means I know exactly how many animals I'm allowed, and it sure ain't just 5. The deputies burst openly into laughter this time, unable to resist the humor of the situation. Karen flushed deeply, her bravado crumbling under the weight of public embarrassment. She sputtered awkwardly, grasping desperately for dignity that was rapidly slipping away. "Well, you still could have said something sooner," she muttered accusingly, though the venom had noticeably vanished from her voice. "And miss out on all the fun?" Jack countered playfully, shaking his head. "Nah, Karen, watching you in action is better than Saturday morning cartoons." The deputies, thoroughly entertained, tipped their hats and prepared to leave, still chuckling at the unexpected morning show. Sheriff Allen patted Jack's shoulder with a grin. "Sorry to disturb your coffee, Jack. Hope your morning improves." "Oh, it already has," Jack laughed softly, glancing warmly toward Karen, whose humiliation had turned into quiet fury as she stormed off toward her property. He knew the issue wouldn't end there. Karen wasn't someone to accept defeat graciously. As the sheriff's vehicles pulled away, Jack returned to his porch, contemplating the day's strange events. Karen's irrational feud had been amusing at first, but now a nagging unease began to grow inside him. He'd seen that determined look in her eyes before. There was undoubtedly more drama coming. Jack finished his coffee in thoughtful silence, suddenly realizing that his peaceful ranch life might soon become more complicated than ever. Karen had tasted embarrassment today, but tomorrow she'd likely return stronger, angrier, and even more determined to get revenge. Jack sighed deeply, shaking his head, knowing this morning had set in motion events he could barely imagine. "Well," he murmured softly to his grazing herd, "guess we've got ourselves a rodeo now." 2 days after Karen's dramatic humiliation at Jack's ranch gate, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. The incident had become legendary overnight, circulating through the community's group chats and social gatherings. Jack hoped that Karen would accept defeat gracefully, but deep down, he suspected that his neighbor had other plans simmering beneath the surface. Karen Baxter wasn't known for retreating quietly from any battle, real or imagined. Jack's suspicions were confirmed one evening as he strolled into the community clubhouse for the monthly Homeowners Association meeting. Normally a sleepy gathering where attendees debated paint colors or argued about mailbox placements, tonight the room felt oddly charged. Residents huddled in whispered clusters, glancing nervously toward Jack as he arrived. A few friends greeted him warmly, but many eyed him cautiously, uncertain about their allegiances. Karen stood at the front, dressed in an impeccable cream-colored pantsuit, clutching a thick binder. Her confident posture suggested she had spent every waking hour since the ranch incident preparing her revenge. When her eyes met Jack's, she offered a tight, icy smile, a stark contrast to her earlier embarrassment. Jack settled into his seat, already sensing tonight would be anything but routine. Once the meeting was called to order, Karen seized the floor immediately, her voice strong, measured, and dripping with calculated calmness. "It's come to my attention," she began carefully, eyeing Jack pointedly, "that our community regulations regarding livestock have been severely outdated." A murmur rippled through the audience, curiosity piqued. Karen continued, undeterred, pulling documents dramatically from her binder. "As it stands, residents can technically keep any number of animals. But is that what we truly want? To live in fear of farm animals running rampant through our quiet neighborhood streets?" Jack watched incredulously as Karen handed out printed pamphlets adorned with exaggerated cartoon cows trampling flower gardens and angry chickens pecking at terrified children. Her scare tactics, though absurd, seemed to gain some traction among neighbors who now exchanged anxious glances. Jack struggled not to laugh, wondering if anyone seriously believed cows would stampede through suburbia like wild buffalo. "Therefore," Karen continued, emboldened by the tentative support she sensed in the room, I propose a new HOA regulation. No homeowner shall possess more than 5 animals total, regardless of property size or purpose. Violators will face hefty fines and immediate action to remove excess livestock. Jack couldn't hold back a smile. Karen's strategy was transparent, aiming specifically at him, yet her audience remained oblivious. He raised his hand casually, deciding it was time to correct this nonsense before the vote took a dangerous turn. Karen, you realize state agricultural exemptions override local HOA rules, right? He asked calmly, watching her eyes narrow. My position as Livestock Commissioner specifically ensures farms and ranches operate freely within state law. Karen stiffened slightly, but quickly regrouped. Commissioner or not, she fired back crisply, you still live in our neighborhood, and these rules apply to everyone equally. But you can't regulate state-protected activities through HOA ordinances, Jack countered smoothly, feeling the mood shift slightly back toward him. It's like trying to ban fire trucks because you dislike sirens. Chuckles broke out across the room. Karen flushed bright red, visibly frustrated by the growing laughter, and struggled briefly to regain her composure. I see, she snapped bitterly, voice sharp with controlled anger. Then perhaps we'll need to pursue this differently. The meeting quickly devolved from there. After an awkwardly swift adjournment, neighbors trickled away, unsure whether to support Karen's mission or Jack's common-sense rebuttal. Jack felt relief. He'd successfully defended himself this round, but he knew Karen would never stop at logical defeat alone. His suspicions proved justified almost immediately. Over the next week, Jack began noticing peculiar occurrences around his property. Gates were inexplicably unlocked, fences sagged suspiciously overnight, and tools vanished only to appear scattered haphazardly across distant fields. Each incident minor yet pointed, a clear message that Karen wouldn't be discouraged so easily. Yet, no direct evidence connected Karen to these petty disturbances. Jack tried to brush them off, unwilling to let paranoia invade his daily life. But soon, small annoyances grew larger, escalating from mere nuisances to outright hazards. One morning, Jack awoke to frantic barking from his dogs. Rushing outside, he found several frightened goats wandering loose on the roadway, narrowly avoiding passing cars. Neighbors helped Jack herd the confused animals back safely, their eyes sympathetic yet uncertain. Jack thanked them, but deep frustration bubbled within him, knowing exactly who orchestrated this chaos. Karen had crossed a line from petty meddling to dangerous sabotage, endangering both animals and people alike. Determined to end this nonsense, Jack quietly installed security cameras around his ranch, carefully hidden among barns and fence posts. Within days, his precautions paid off. Footage revealed Karen skulking near his property at night, tampering with fences, leaving gates open intentionally. Jack grimaced, saddened rather than angered at her relentless pettiness. He pondered briefly how to handle this revelation. Reporting her to the authorities would be easy, but something in him resisted that immediate retaliation. Instead, Jack decided to confront Karen directly, hoping a face-to-face conversation might end this escalating feud peacefully. He knocked firmly on her door one afternoon, holding a USB stick with the incriminating footage. Karen answered, visibly startled at Jack's unexpected visit. Her initial hostility quickly shifted into nervous apprehension as Jack quietly handed her the USB stick. Karen, he began calmly, I think we've both made our points. You don't like animals near your yard. Fine. But sabotaging my ranch is dangerous and illegal. I have evidence now. It stops here, or I take this further. Karen stared at him, silent for a long moment, uncertainty flickering across her face. Finally, she responded stiffly, chin tilted defiantly upward. If you're threatening me, Jack, it won't end well. Jack sighed wearily, disappointed at her stubbornness. I'm not threatening, Karen. I'm offering you a chance to end this peacefully. Please take it. She slammed the door abruptly, leaving Jack standing alone on her porch, sensing that the real battle had only just begun. As he turned away, he couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's desperation was growing dangerously irrational. The stakes had been raised dramatically, and Jack feared the true fight was yet to come. The wind had picked up that night, sweeping across the fields with a restless energy that made Jack uneasy. His dogs were barking more than usual, their sharp yelps echoing through the darkness like an alarm clock for trouble. Jack stepped out onto his porch, eyes scanning the moonlit pasture. Everything looked still on the surface, but something didn't sit right. Years on the land had taught him to trust his gut, and tonight, it was screaming that something was off. Ever since the security footage confirmed Karen's involvement in tampering with his fences, Jack had kept a close watch on his ranch. But now, he decided to activate the motion sensors on the newly installed tracking system. Hidden GPS tags were embedded in a few of his most valuable animals, particularly his prized Hereford bull, Tank, a massive and expensive beast known more for his chill demeanor than his strength. Tank was the crown jewel of Jack's herd, a gentle giant with the bloodline of champions and the temperament of a sleepy dog. Losing him would be a serious blow. At first, the GPS readings remained stable. Tank hadn't moved more than a few feet from his resting spot all evening. But just past midnight, Jack's phone buzzed with an alert. Tank was on the move, and fast. The signal showed a rapid change in location, straight toward the edge of Jack's property. Jack bolted upright, throwing on his coat and boots without bothering to lace them. He grabbed his flashlight, jumped into his ATV, and tore down the trail. When he reached the gate at the northern boundary, he found it swung wide open, the chain cut clean through. Tire tracks led into the field, curving around toward the back trail near Karen's property. Jack's heart dropped. He followed the signal, weaving through the darkness as the tracker pinged from Tank's embedded tag. The trail ended at the backside of Karen's detached garage. Jack turned off the engine, stepping quietly toward the building. He heard something, a low, deep grunt followed by a clattering noise like hooves on concrete. Carefully, he crept around the corner and peeked through the side window. There, in the middle of the garage, stood Tank, looking bewildered, surrounded by lawn furniture and an old treadmill. A pile of lettuce lay half-eaten on the floor like someone had tried to lure him inside. And then there was Karen. She stood in the corner, phone in hand, pacing in a frenzy. "Yes, I have him. I'm not sure what to do now. He's bigger than I thought. No, I can't just walk him back. He's snorting at me." Jack nearly laughed aloud but held it in. He'd never seen someone look so wildly out of place, standing in designer slippers with hay stuck in her hair, flinching every time Tank moved his head. Her plan, whatever it had been, was clearly falling apart. Jack pulled out his phone and began filming quietly through the window. Karen's voice trembled. "You said if I got one of the animals, it would prove he's over the limit. But this thing is a monster. He looked calm at first and now he keeps staring at me like he knows what I did." Tank, for his part, was indeed staring. Not with aggression, but with the passive confusion of a 2,000-pound animal who had been tricked into stepping on a yoga mat instead of grass. Karen tried to push him toward the garage door with a broom, which Tank promptly ignored. She yelped as he took a sleepy step toward her, brushing against the ping-pong table with his flank and knocking over a bike. Jack had seen enough. He knocked firmly on the side of the garage, his flashlight beaming into the window. Karen shrieked, whipping around with wild eyes. When she saw Jack standing there, arms crossed and eyebrow raised, her mouth opened but no words came out. "You need help with your new pet?" Jack said calmly, suppressing a smile. Karen stammered something unintelligible as Jack opened the side door. Tank, hearing a familiar voice, mooed softly and ambled toward the exit, finally finding a way out of his concrete prison. Jack stepped aside, letting the bull pass, then turned back to Karen, who looked like she'd just survived a tornado made of cows. "You broke into my pasture," Jack said flatly, no longer amused. "Stole my bull, cut my fence, and you stuffed him in a garage. What exactly was the plan here?" Karen seemed to snap out of her daze, grasping for her usual superiority. It's not theft. It's an inspection. I had to document the overage for HOA enforcement. By smuggling livestock onto your property? Jack asked, incredulous. That's not an inspection. That's kidnapping. And it's a felony. Karen looked genuinely startled. You wouldn't press charges. I mean, come on. It's not like I hurt him. No, Jack said evenly. But you put people in danger. What if Tank had panicked? What if he'd gotten loose on the road and caused an accident? You think because you live in a subdivision that the law works differently here? Karen opened her mouth to respond, but headlights suddenly lit up the driveway. Sheriff Allen's cruiser rolled in, parking beside the garage. Someone had apparently called it in. Maybe a neighbor had seen the bull wandering through Karen's backyard and dialed 911. The sheriff got out, took one look at Tank, then at Jack and Karen, and exhaled heavily. You know, I was hoping for a quiet shift tonight. Karen tried to explain, her story unraveling with every sentence. Jack provided the GPS data, the video footage, and even offered to show the cut fence. The deputies looked stunned, clearly not expecting to deal with grand theft bovine on a Wednesday night. Karen was placed in the back of the cruiser, not under arrest yet, but definitely not free to go either. Sheriff Allen promised to follow up after reviewing everything. Jack nodded, watching her slump in the seat, humiliated once again. As Tank ambled back across the pasture under the moonlight, Jack walked beside him, the chaos slowly fading behind them. He scratched the bull's neck and muttered, "You sure do make one hell of a witness, buddy." But Jack knew this wasn't over. Karen had officially crossed the line from nuisance to criminal, and while tonight had ended in his favor, the storm wasn't finished. There was a tension in the air now, one that whispered Karen still had cards left to play. And next time, she might not wait until nightfall to deal them. By the following morning, the story of Karen locking a prize bull inside her garage had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. It started with whispers, then turned into screenshots of Ring doorbell footage, and before noon, the local news station had picked it up under the headline, "Bull in the Suburbs, HOA Feud Takes a Wild Turn." The video of Karen jabbing at a 1,000-pound animal with a broom while shrieking into a Bluetooth headset was played in slow motion, complete with dramatic music. Jack couldn't help but chuckle when he saw it air on the diner TV as he picked up feed supplies. It might have been humiliating for her, but it had given him a free cup of coffee and a standing ovation from the local farmers in town. But while half the town found it hilarious, the other half was unsure what to think. Karen had always presented herself as a pillar of the community, a donor to garden fundraisers, an organizer of HOA potlucks, the first to deliver flyers about upcoming bylaws. Now she was also the woman who'd attempted to confiscate a bull in a suburban garage. That contradiction was hard for some people to process, and Karen, unfortunately, refused to let it go. Instead of laying low and waiting for things to die down, she went on the offensive. Within 24 hours, she had posted a 10-paragraph explanation on the neighborhood Facebook page, claiming she had acted in the best interest of community safety, citing fears of unregulated livestock behavior and potential biohazards. She even threw in a veiled accusation that Tank had charged her and claimed Jack had edited the footage to paint her as unstable. It would have been laughable if it hadn't gained a few sympathetic responses from residents who disliked Jack's growing celebrity. Things escalated when Karen began calling local news stations, trying to spin her own version of events. One outlet actually bit, broadcasting a segment where Karen sat in her living room, framed by perfectly arranged pillows and a tray of untouched tea, describing her ordeal. "I was trying to do what the HOA was too afraid to," she said, tearfully glancing at the camera. "I feared for the safety of our children, our pets, our homes. That bull was massive. I thought it might trample someone." Back at the ranch, Jack watched the segment with his mouth open, nearly choking on his sandwich. Tank, meanwhile, lay sprawled in the background, chewing cud like he didn't have a care in the world. The idea that he might trample someone was as absurd as suggesting he might run for mayor. Soon, Karen's online tirade transformed into action. She filed a formal complaint with the county, demanding a full investigation into Jack's ranching practices. She accused him of environmental violations, improper fencing, unauthorized feed storage, and even noise pollution, though the only loud things on his property were the roosters and Karen herself. Though the complaints were dismissed quickly, Karen framed it as evidence of corruption, insisting Jack's position as Livestock Commissioner had created a conflict of interest in the handling of her grievances. The final straw came when Karen filed a civil lawsuit, claiming emotional distress and reputational damage. The suit accused Jack of spearheading a public humiliation campaign, citing the viral footage and public laughter as intentional harassment. She claimed to have suffered anxiety, sleep deprivation, and a decline in her social standing, all apparently caused by one bull and one rancher with a sense of humor. Jack didn't know whether to be furious or impressed by her persistence. His attorney, a practical woman with a fondness for sarcasm, assured him the case was paper-thin. "She's suing you for the consequences of her own actions," she said, thumbing through the documents. "It won't hold. But it'll make a mess in the meantime." Indeed, the mess came quickly. Court summons arrived. Jack's name was dragged through HOA newsletters, painted alternately as a villain or a victim depending on the author. The community, once unified by garden parties and summer block cookouts, had now split into factions. The animal rights-wielding ranch defenders and Karen's new group, the suburban safety advocates. Their meetings were tense, passive-aggressive minefields where even cookie choices sparked argument. Jack tried to stay out of the chaos, but it followed him everywhere. At the grocery store, strangers gave him either high fives or suspicious side eyes. At the post office, someone left a pamphlet in his mailbox titled, "When Livestock Cross the Line," a suburban guide to reinforcing boundaries. Even his mechanic jokingly asked if Tank needed a parking permit now that he was a suburban garage resident. But what Karen hadn't counted on was how deeply the community actually valued Jack. He'd spent years quietly helping his neighbors, fixing broken fences, donating eggs, plowing driveways in winter without asking for thanks. So when her lawsuit hit, support poured in like a flood. Local ranchers organized a "We Stand with Jack" barbecue fundraiser. The sheriff's department sent over an official letter stating Jack had broken no laws. Even the mayor's office chimed in, diplomatically reminding residents that agriculture was not just permitted but celebrated in their county. Then came the protests. It started with a few ranchers gathering in front of Karen's house holding humorous signs. "Cows over Karen's, save the bulls," and "legal hooves matter." But the crowd grew quickly. Farmers arrived with tractors, miniature goats in strollers, and someone even led a chicken on a leash. A local brass band showed up uninvited and played upbeat versions of classic country songs. The event went viral within hours. Karen, predictably, called the police. But the officers who arrived found no laws being broken, just cheerful protesters, free lemonade, and Tank, who had become the guest of honor thanks to a cardboard cutout placed at the head of the parade route. His face had been printed on t-shirts, mugs, and even garden flags. From her window, Karen watched as her carefully constructed plan to vilify Jack exploded in her face. The community she once controlled now laughed at her expense. Her once loyal supporters grew quieter, some slipping away entirely. Others began to question her motives more openly. And while Karen still clung to her lawsuit like a lifeboat, it was starting to sink fast. Jack, meanwhile, kept his head down, attending only one brief press conference where he calmly said, "I'm just a rancher trying to do his job. I didn't ask for this circus, but if we're going to have one, I'll bring the popcorn." Behind the scenes, his lawyer worked to countersue for defamation, but Jack hadn't made up his mind yet. Part of him wanted to let it go, to avoid dragging things on. But another part, the part that had watched Karen endanger his animals, lie to his neighbors, and weaponize a community, wasn't so ready to forgive. Either way, it was clear the tide had turned. Karen had lost the narrative. And even if she didn't realize it yet, her campaign against the ranch had turned into a full-blown rodeo, and she was the one tied to the fence. The morning air was unusually calm for what was about to unfold. Jack sat on his porch, sipping black coffee while the sun rose over his pastures. His animals moved slowly through the dew-covered fields, unconcerned by the human chaos that had colored the past few weeks. From a distance, the ranch looked as peaceful as ever, but beneath the surface, Jack knew something had shifted. The protest, the news attention, the lawsuit, it had all built to a peak. And yet, something inside him was tired. Not defeated, just exhausted. Fighting fire with fire was never his style. He'd spent a lifetime solving problems with work, patience, and a little good humor. But nothing about this feud had followed normal rules. Then, unexpectedly, an idea began to form. It started with a suggestion from his niece, a plucky teenager with more creativity than restraint. "Uncle Jack," she'd said, swirling cereal in her bowl, "you should invite her over. Make her face it all. Like a real tour. Bet she wouldn't last 5 minutes." Jack had laughed at first. Karen stepping onto his ranch willingly? Unlikely. But the idea wouldn't leave his mind. Not as a trap. Not as revenge. But maybe, just maybe, as a lesson. Because if there was one thing Jack knew better than fences and livestock, it was that some people only learned when they got their boots dirty. So later that week, Jack sent a formal invitation to Karen via the HOA bulletin and her mailbox. It read plainly, "You are formally invited to tour my ranch. Come see what you've been fighting against. You might find we have more in common than you think. And I promise, no bulls in garages this time." He signed it simply, with his title, State Livestock Commissioner. To his surprise, she accepted. She arrived on Saturday morning, clad in expensive riding boots that had clearly never touched dirt and a sun hat more suitable for brunch than a ranch. Jack met her at the gate, dressed as he always was, worn jeans, flannel shirt, and a calm expression. Karen's smile was forced, her eyes darting around as if waiting for a trapdoor to open. Jack welcomed her politely and motioned toward the first barn. They began the tour in silence. He showed her where the feed was stored, how the rotation system worked, how water lines were maintained. She nodded stiffly, asking few questions. Then came the goats, who, true to their nature, immediately took a liking to her expensive scarf, nibbling at the fabric until she shrieked and flailed in a panic. Jack bit his lip, doing his best not to laugh as she wrestled the scarf free and declared the animals unervingly intelligent. Next came the pigs. Karen refused to go near the pens, claiming the smell might cling to her for days. Jack shrugged and moved on, pausing at the chicken coop, where a rogue rooster chose that exact moment to flap directly at her ankles. She yelped and ran behind Jack, barely catching herself before tripping on her pristine boot. The chickens, unbothered, resumed their business as if none of it had happened. After an hour, her nerves were fraying. Her hat was crooked, her hair windswept, and a smear of mud on her coat suggested she had leaned against something she hadn't expected to be alive. Jack led her to a shady spot beneath the old pecan tree and handed her a bottle of water. She took it with trembling fingers, muttering something about rural warfare. Jack sat down across from her. For a long moment, neither said anything. Then, quietly, Jack spoke. "You know, Karen, I never wanted this to be a battle. I moved out here to build something simple. Feed my animals, work my land, be left alone to do what I do best." Karen looked at him, defensive still, but not combative. "You made me look like a fool," she said, voice softer than expected. "You did that on your own," Jack replied gently. "I just didn't stop you." She looked away, eyes tracking a nearby cow lazily chewing grass. "I thought you were exploiting the system, using your position to get around the rules." "I'm enforcing state law," Jack replied. "Same way I would if anyone else in the county were doing what I do. This ranch isn't just a hobby, it's regulated, inspected, documented. What I'm doing is legal, responsible, and frankly, good for the local economy." Karen didn't respond right away. A breeze passed between them, carrying the distant sound of sheep bleating from the lower field. "My whole life, I've lived by structure," she finally said. "Rules make sense to me. Without them, people take advantage. And when I saw what you were doing, it didn't fit. I thought it was chaos." Jack nodded slowly. "I get that. But not everything can be measured in neat lines and checklists. This," he gestured at the fields, "this is life. It's messy, it smells weird, and it doesn't always ask permission before it moves." For a second, something flickered in Karen's face. Recognition, maybe. Or just fatigue. She sighed. The lawsuit was a mistake. Jack didn't react immediately. "I figured you'd come to that eventually." "I'll drop it," she said. "The complaint, the campaign, all of it. You win." Jack shook his head. "It was never about winning. Just coexisting." Karen stood up slowly, brushing her coat off. "You ever think about teaching this stuff to people?" Jack chuckled. "I thought I was." They walked back toward the gate together, not quite friends, but not enemies either. When they reached her car, Karen paused and turned toward him. "Look," she said, hesitant, "about that bull thing? I really thought I was doing the right thing." Jack grinned. "Karen, you locked a 2,000-pound animal in your garage. There's a children's book waiting to be written about that." She smiled, reluctantly. "Yeah. I deserved the memes." Jack nodded solemnly. "You really did." As she pulled away, Jack watched her go, uncertain if this peace would last but content with the moment. The ranch felt calmer somehow, like it had shrugged off a storm. Maybe she'd go back to policing mailbox colors or campaigning for solar-powered speed signs. That would be fine, as long as she left the livestock alone. 3 weeks later, the HOA hosted its annual community fair. Jack was invited as a guest of honor. He arrived with a few animals for the petting zoo and a donation of fresh eggs and produce. What he didn't expect was what he found at the center of the event. A banner read, "Ranch Day Celebration," and underneath it, wearing a badge that read, "Honorary Livestock Liaison," was Karen. She stood awkwardly beside a sheep, holding a feed bucket and smiling nervously at a line of kids waiting to pet the animals. Jack approached, arms crossed, amused. "You got promoted," he said. She rolled her eyes. "Don't push it." He reached into a bag, pulled out a small framed photo of Tank, and handed it to her. "For your garage," he said. She laughed, shaking her head. "You're never letting that go, are you?" "Never," Jack said. "But hey, welcome to the ranch." And just like that, the war was over.